You're nothing more than a walking bank account. Harold. Instactrant, that was the sentence I heard from my own daughter. Spoken in a whisper she thought I could not catch. The words cut through me sharper than any knife. And in that instant I felt my chest tighten, as if all the air in the room had been stolen. I had raised her. I had carried her on my shoulders when she was a child. Kissed her scraped knees. Worked double shifts so she could go to college. And yet, in her eyes, I was nothing but a wallet wrapped in old skin. My name is Harold Bennett. I am 75 years old. And tonight I sit alone in a house that used to be filled with noise and warmth. The silence now presses on my ears until it almost drives me mad. Every creak of the floor reminds me that I am no longer seen as a father, or even a man worth listening to. I am a figure they tolerate until I am gone. A shadow holding on to property deeds and savings they are already counting. The last Sunday dinner made that truth impossible to ignore. My daughter Evelyn sat at the table with her husband, rolling her eyes at every word I spoke. My eldest son Thomas kept checking his watch as if his time with me was punishment. And my youngest, Andrew, laughed too loudly at the children's games, trying to drown out the unease that hung between us. I told them the story of how I built my workshop from nothing but an old hammer and a rusted saw. Of the nights I slept on the floor to save enough money for lumber. But halfway through, my voice faltered. They did not notice. They did not care. That was when Evelyn leaned closer to her husband and spat the words that will never leave me. He's nothing more than a walking bank account. He chuckled. Thomas muttered, as long as he remembers how to sign his name, that's all we need. My youngest said nothing. But the way he looked away, ashamed and silent, told me enough. I spent that night staring at the ceiling, unable to close my eyes. Their words replayed in my mind, each repetition heavier than the last. I realized something I had been avoiding for years. They no longer loved me for who I was. I was useful, not cherished, convenient, not respected. That night I made a decision, a desperate, reckless decision. If they already believed I was fading, maybe I would let them. Maybe I would show them what it looks like when a father begins to disappear. I needed to know. Would my children reach for my hand out of love, or would they only tighten their grip on what I would leave behind? I did not know it then, but the game I was about to play would destroy everything I thought I knew about family. Before the words that shattered me, there was another life. I can still smell sawdust on my sleeves. My shop sat on a quiet corner in Salem, Massachusetts. The paint peeled and the roof sang when the wind came from the harbor. I loved that place. I started with almost nothing. A borrowed hammer, 3 dull chisels, a workbench I built from a door someone left on the curb. I fixed chairs for neighbors and planed stubborn doors for old houses. I said yes to honest work and learned to make it sing. That is where I met Nora. She carried a broken picture frame like a fragile bone, her mother on a beach in Maine. She said, "Can you save it?" I told her I would try. I glued the joint and cut new glass with slow hands. She brought coffee the next morning. She returned with a second frame and a shy smile. We kept talking until there were no reasons left. What remained was love. We married the next year. Winter was long and mean. The boiler failed twice, and we boiled water on the stove to keep the pipes from freezing. We rented a small house near a schoolyard. At night I spread plans on the kitchen table, while she wrote invoices and painted signs. We dreamed in small steps. A porch at dusk. A small garden. A family that would fill the rooms with noise. Our first child was a girl. We named her Evelyn. I was afraid to hold her. Nora guided my hands and laughed softly. "You will not break her," she said. "You will teach her to be brave." Evelyn lined up crayons by shade. When we ran out of storybooks, I read the grocery list. She asked about every tool. What does a plane do? Why is the saw loud? Can wood feel pain? I told her the truth. Tools shape. Hearts decide. 2 years later, our son arrived. We named him Thomas. He followed me to the shop on Saturdays and swept the floor. By 10, he had grease on his palms and measured twice. He asked how much things cost. Not to judge, but to learn the weight of labor. When a client underpaid me, he studied the envelope and said, "That is not right." I hugged him and said, "We will be fine." We were. Barely, but we were together. Andrew came last. Our surprise. He kept us awake and laughing. He clapped for the moon. At 5, he asked if I could make a real boat. I built a tiny skiff in the yard. We pushed it into a pond. It sank after minutes, and he cheered. We dragged it to shore. "We can fix it," he said. That is how his mind worked. Soft. Hopeful. Brave in a quiet way. Money stayed close to the edge. We paid bills in stacks and held our breath while checks cleared. I took side jobs to keep the lights on. I repaired school desks and built shelves in damp basements. Nora kept the books and calmed every panic with tea. When a storm tore shingles from the roof, she climbed the ladder beside me and handed nails. When I lost a bid to a chain store, she said, "Let them have cheap work. We will keep good work." She believed when I could not. I tried to teach the children things that do not get grades. Return the cart. Be 5 minutes early. When they fought, I made them share one cookie until they stopped. When they lied, I took one slow breath before I spoke. I raised my voice more than I should. I missed a recital and ran to catch the last song. I worked too late when I should have sat at the table. As they grew, the world tugged them apart. Evelyn liked debate club and local meetings on public TV. She wanted order and a plan. Thomas fell for engines and spreadsheets and fixed the Wi-Fi with a sigh. Andrew wrote lyrics in the margins of his homework and left the dishes to soak. Nora touched each of them with the same calm. She baked bread that made the whole house smell like a promise. I did not see the drift at first. It began as tiny changes. Fewer dinners together. Screens at the table that glowed. I let it slide because work was heavy and the bills did not care about ritual. I told myself love would coast. I told myself respect would stay if I held still. I was wrong. But I could not see it then. I opened the shop each morning and locked the door each night. I confused doing with loving. Years ran fast. The children learned to drive and then to leave. They came home less often. I kept the old hammer above the bench for the day one of them would claim it. I thought it would be a relic that made them proud. I did not imagine it would become evidence in a case I did not know I was losing. Back then, I still believed we were unbreakable. Back then, I still saw hope each morning when I turned the sign to open. The fracture revealed itself on a winter evening, sharper than the wind that rattled the windows. Nora had been gone for 4 years by then. Cancer had taken her in slow, cruel waves. I thought the children and I had shared that grief, that it had bound us. But grief does strange things. Sometimes it stitches. Sometimes it rots. For us, it was the latter. It started small, the way storms often do. Evelyn called one afternoon to ask about the property line behind the house. She wanted details about the deed. She said it was because a neighbor was planting too close to the fence. I gave her the file. A week later, Thomas asked for the safe deposit key, saying he wanted to check on insurance papers. I handed it over. Andrew asked if I had updated my will. He laughed when he said it, but his eyes stayed too long on mine. That night, I could not sleep. I walked through the house in the dark, running my hand along the banister I had carved 30 years earlier. It still felt strong, though worn. I sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by the silence that used to be filled with Nora's voice. And I wondered if the children saw me as anything more than a man clutching fading assets. The breaking point came on a Sunday. I had cooked a roast, just as I used to when Nora was alive. The house smelled of rosemary and garlic, scents that once meant home. The table was set, polished silver. The old china with the faded blue rims. They arrived, each with their own distractions. Evelyn carried her laptop bag and spent half the meal clicking on emails. Thomas argued quietly with his wife about money. Andrew came late, apologizing but offering no real reason. I tried to tell a story, one Nora loved, about the time we painted the shop together and ended up with blue streaks across our clothes. I laughed as I spoke, but the sound fell flat. Evelyn interrupted with a sigh. Dad, you've told that one 100 times. Can't you talk about something new? Thomas smirked. Maybe it's starting. You know, memory issues. His wife chuckled softly. Andrew did not defend me. He only looked away. My fork slipped from my hand. The clang against the plate startled even me. I stared at them, at the faces of my own blood, and felt as though I was surrounded by strangers. Strangers who carried my name but not my heart. After dinner, I overheard them in the hallway. Their voices carried through the thin walls, careless and cutting. Evelyn, we need to think about when he can't handle things anymore. Thomas, the sooner we organize the finances, the better. Andrew, as long as it doesn't get messy, free. It was not grief speaking. It was calculation. They were no longer my children in that moment. They were auditors, planners, strategists, dissecting my life as if I were already gone. I stood frozen in the living room, staring at the empty chairs, listening to the words that stripped away decades of sacrifice. In their voices, I did not hear love, or even worry. I heard impatience. I heard greed. I heard the confirmation of a fear I had carried silently for years. That night, in the hollow of my bedroom, I understood something brutal. I had lost them long before. The dinners, the gifts, the tuition payments, the loans forgiven. None of it mattered. They respected my money, not my soul. They saw my age as a weakness to exploit, not a crown to honor. I lay awake until dawn, and in the quiet hours I made a decision that would change the course of all our lives. If they believed I was slipping, then I would let them see it. If they believed I was fading, I would test how far their loyalty reached. I would pretend to lose myself, and in that dangerous act, I would find out if my children still had hearts that could recognize their father. I began with a notebook, a plain spiral from the corner store on Essex Street. On the first page I wrote the date and one line: I will learn how to vanish. If I did this, there would be no easy return. But I needed the truth. I needed to see my children without the mask of respect. I read about memory loss until my eyes stung. Confusion near sunset. Repeating the same question. Misplacing keys in the oven. Forgetting names that should be carved in stone. I chose signs that would not put anyone in danger. I would not drive while pretending. I would not fake what could harm someone else. Pain is not a stage. I would not make it a show. Next, I called a lawyer who once helped with the shop lease. Brendan Doyle. I told him I wanted to shield the business and the house in case I became unwell. He asked if there was a diagnosis. I said no. He asked if this was about family tension. I said yes. Within a week, he filed papers that set guardrails around what I owned. No one could move money without my consent. The house could not be sold without my signature. The shop would keep running under a manager I trusted. If I ever fell ill, I bought a small recorder and set it on a shelf by the hallway. I wanted proof for the day I doubted myself. Memory is soft, especially when your own children speak in kind voices that hide hard plans. I wanted the sound of truth, not the story we tell ourselves after. Then I wrote a script for the first month. Week 1, I would misplace simple things. Week 2, I would repeat short stories and lose track of days. Week 3, I would mix names and ask the same question within an hour. Week 4, I would forget appointments that mattered to them more than to me. Each step small. Each step believable. I practiced in the mirror. Not grand gestures. Small pauses. A sentence that fades. A sigh held a little too long. I forced myself to sit with the shame. I said I am sorry into an empty room and let the words taste bitter. If I could not respect the pain of others, I had no right to borrow its shape. I chose one ally. My neighbor, Mrs. Russo. She knows the rhythm of my house. I told her I might act distracted for a while. She did not like the idea. Harold, grief can turn on the lights or snap them off, she said. Are you sure you want to walk in the dark on purpose? I told her I had been in the dark for years already. She sighed and said she would keep an eye on me. The first test was small. I invited the 3 of them to dinner the next Sunday. I cooked simple food and set the table as always. When Thomas asked about a client invoice, I blinked as if searching a drawer in my mind. Did I send that already? My voice sounded thin. He frowned. 5 minutes later, I asked the same thing. Evelyn glanced at her husband. Andrew looked at the floor. I left my glasses in the freezer and asked everyone to help me look. Andrew laughed and then stopped when he saw my face. This is not funny, he said to the room. But he did not touch my shoulder. He opened cabinets like a man hunting a nuisance. Not helping a person. We found the glasses under a bag of peas. I apologized 3 times. Evelyn asked if I had been sleeping enough. Thomas stood in the doorway and stared at the office, where I keep old files. That night I wrote everything down. The time they arrived. The words I chose. The exact comments they made. I felt a tremor of guilt and nearly called the whole thing off. Then I remembered the sentence I had heard in my own hall. Walking bank account. 2 words can crush a year of good intentions. I kept writing. In the second week, I moved to stories. I told the tale of the blue paint again. I said it was spring when it had been fall. I named a song that had not existed yet. Thomas corrected me with a stiff smile. 10 minutes later, I repeated the wrong date. Evelyn typed something I could not see. Andrew asked if I had taken my vitamins. I said yes. He nodded like a clerk checking a box. I could feel the gears turning behind their eyes. Not love. Not yet. Something colder. Numbers. Plans. I went to bed early and held Nora's old scarf like a rope that could keep me from falling. I whispered her name once. I told her I was sorry for the deception and that I would stop if it began to hurt the people who still deserved my tenderness. Then I let the plan carry me into the next day. Steady as a tide that does not ask permission. I set alarms for my own safety. 1 on the stove, 1 on the front door. I placed a note by the kettle that said, "Check the flame." I told myself the rules twice each morning. Pretend, but protect. Seek truth, but do no harm. I could live with pain. I would not live with carelessness. The 3rd Sunday arrived heavy with clouds. I had polished the old oak table. The same one where Nora once laid fresh bread, hoping it might still hold the warmth of her hands. My children came, each carrying not love, but the weight of their own distractions. Evelyn walked in first, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing impatiently to her husband to carry the casserole. Thomas followed with his tie loosened, as though dining with his father was an obligation after church. Andrew stumbled in last. Late again. His twins clutching juice boxes, their laughter sharp against the silence I carried inside me. I had planned that day carefully. I would forget the name of my neighbor. I would ask twice about the weather forecast. I would mix up the names of the grandchildren, calling one boy Peter when his name was Paul. Each slip came with practiced hesitation. the way I had rehearsed in front of the mirror. The responses came quickly. Evelyn set her phone on the table and spoke in a tone so measured it felt like she was reading a diagnosis. Dad, this isn't normal. Confusion like that needs checking. Her husband nodded, his eyes already calculating. Thomas leaned forward, folding his hands the way he did in business meetings. We can't ignore this. We should set an appointment this week. Oh man, I looked at Andrew, hoping for softness. Instead, he whispered to his wife, and I caught only fragments. If it gets worse, papers, maybe soon. She nodded. My heart stumbled. They did not look at me as a man struggling. They looked at me as a case to manage. At dinner, I told the same story twice, pretending not to remember the first telling, the shop, the blue paint, the joke Nora used to make. When I finished the second time, Evelyn sighed heavily. Dad, you just said that. Don't you realize? I lowered my head and mumbled an apology. Thomas exchanged a glance with her. A silent agreement between prosecutors. Andrew forced a smile and said, It's fine. Dad, we'll figure things out. His voice was too smooth, too practiced, as though rehearsed for a role. The children grew quiet after that, talking less to me and more to one another. Their words slid across the table like secret notes. We need a specialist. What about early tests? Better to get things organized. They thought I could not hear, but every syllable struck me. Organized. Tests. Better. Words cold as metal. After the meal, I sat in my chair by the window, listening as they gathered in the kitchen. I heard the scrape of chairs, the low murmur of strategy. Evelyn's voice cut through, sharp as glass. We can't wait too long. If his mind goes, the finances could be a mess. Thomas replied, I'll call a lawyer tomorrow, just in case. Power of attorney. That sort of thing. Andrew's voice was soft but certain. And the house? Too big for him. Sooner or later it has to go. My throat tightened. I gripped the armrests of the chair until my knuckles whitened. They spoke of my life like accountants balancing a sheet. I was not their father. I was a column of numbers, a property to be divided, a problem to be solved. When they finally left, the house fell into silence again. I wrote every detail in my notebook. The words, the tone, the glances. My hand shook so badly I had to press hard with the pen to make the ink flow. I ended the page with a single line. They see the inheritance, not me. I stared at those words until the letters blurred. I wanted to tear the page out, to deny what I had witnessed, but truth cannot be undone once spoken. My plan was working, and the proof was heavier than I imagined. That night, I lay awake, hearing their voices echo through the dark. Organized, lawyer, house. It was not love I uncovered. It was calculation. I closed my eyes and whispered into the empty room. Nora, if only you were here to see this, you would know what they truly are. Thank you for watching. The appointment was set for a Tuesday. Evelyn sent a message that read like a calendar invite. Thomas insisted on driving. Andrew said he would meet us if work allowed. I stood in the hall, tied Nora's scarf, and repeated my rules. Pretend, but protect. Seek truth, but do no harm. The neurologist was a careful man named Collins. He asked simple questions. What day is it? Who is the president? Count backward by sevens. I let my voice thin. I paused in the wrong places. Thomas watched like a supervisor. Evelyn typed on her phone. Andrew arrived late and kept his eyes on the floor. Collins ordered scans and blood work. He said there might be mild decline, then warned that stress can mimic disease, not a diagnosis. More information needed. Evelyn thanked him and asked for next steps. Thomas asked about safety and finances. Andrew asked nothing. On the drive home, Thomas used a tone I hate. Calm and managerial. He said routine helps. He said he would look at my bills so I would not have to worry. I stared at the gray sky over Salem and felt smaller than I had in years. 2 days later, the papers came. Thomas brought a neat folder. Evelyn brought a list. Durable power of attorney. Medical proxy. A draft that placed the house in a trust for efficient management. Andrew sat at the edge of the sofa and kept smoothing his knees. I lifted the first page and felt a tremor in my hands. Planning can be love when it is offered with care. This did not feel like care. It felt like a takeover. Evelyn spoke first. Dad, this is safer. If anything happens, we can act fast. No delays. No confusion. Thomas added that the shop could be sold while the market was strong. That would prevent headaches later. Andrew murmured that it meant less stress for everyone. For everyone. The words tasted like chalk. I asked for time to read. Evelyn said, of course, and set a pen by my elbow. Thomas said he would leave the documents overnight. Andrew looked out the window and said the house felt too big for one person. He did not say it felt like my life. They stepped into the kitchen. The recorder on the shelf kept its quiet watch. I heard the door whisper closed. Then voices. Low and confident. As if the walls were deaf. Evelyn said he seems worse when numbers come up. That will help. Thomas said we should move fast before he resists out of pride. Andrew said this is mercy. We will save him from himself. A chair scraped. A glass filled. Evelyn asked about a timeline for listing the shop. Thomas said 3 months to prepare. 6 to close. Andrew said. And the house. Thomas paused. We stage grief as concern. He said. We use the language of safety. Then we move him. It will be better for everyone. The room tilted. For a second I saw Nora in the doorway. Hands dusted with flour. Eyes that never judged. Then the vision was gone. And only the truth remained. My children had become managers of my exit. They returned to the living room with careful faces. Thomas asked if I had questions. My voice came from far away. Just one. What happens to me after the papers are signed? Evelyn smiled the way people smile when they sell a policy. You rest, she said. We handle the heavy things. Andrew added that I could focus on memories. Memories. As if a life fits inside a small box. They left soon after. The house closed in like a fist. I took Nora's scarf from my neck and buried my face in it until the cotton smelled like a summer we once owned. Then I walked to the shelf and pressed stop on the recorder. The red light went dark. I sat at the table and listened to silence swallow the last of their voices. When the tears came, they did not come loud. They came quiet and steady. I counted them like boards. 1 for the night I missed Evelyn's recital. 1 for the afternoon Thomas sat beside me while I changed the brakes and asked if I would ever be proud of him. 1 for the day. Andrew's skiff sank, and he laughed and said, we can fix it. I had believed I could always fix it. I had believed that if I worked hard enough at love, it would hold. I wrote in the notebook until my hand cramped. They called me a risk. They called me a burden. They called my house a problem. I wrote one more line and underlined it twice. Today I stop pretending for them and start pretending for me. The plan will go on. But the purpose has changed. I am not trying to catch them in a lie. I am holding a mirror so I will never again forget what I saw. Morning brought a thin light. I folded the scarf and put it in the drawer. I made coffee and sat on the back steps. A stray cat watched me from the fence. Wary and thin. I set a little bowl of milk at the edge of the step. The cat did not move. I understood. Trust is a slow animal. By noon the folder still lay on the table. I placed a note on the front that said I will review. Then I closed the office door and walked to the shop. I pressed my palm to the workbench. The wood was scarred and strong. Something settled in me. I am not done. Not as a man. Not as a father. The first storm had broken. Now I knew what I was up against. The turn came the next morning. The phone rang before I finished my coffee. A steady voice asked for me by name. She said she was Julia Keene from the bank on Lafayette Street. She said there had been an attempt to add a signer to my business account and to initiate a transfer. She asked if I had approved Thomas Bennett to act for me. I set the mug down and kept my voice slow. I asked what he wanted to do. She said he brought a copy of a power of attorney and a letter that claimed I had growing cognitive issues. He asked to be added as an authorized signer. He asked to move $40,000 to a consulting firm for asset reorganization. She said the guardrails on the account blocked the change. She asked again if I had approved it. I told her no. I told her I had not given anyone control. She was quiet for a breath. Then she said she would flag the accounts and require me in person for any changes. She asked me to come by with my identification. I thanked her. When I hung up, the room felt tilted, as if the floor had moved half an inch while I was not looking. I stood at the sink and let the water run until it turned cold. Then the doorbell rang. A woman in a navy coat stood on the step with a leather folio. She smiled with her lips but not her eyes. She said her name was Valerie and that she was here for the walkthrough. I asked what walkthrough. She checked her tablet and said the appointment was set by Evelyn for a preliminary valuation. She used words like market snapshot and gentle timeline. She asked if she could take a few photos. I said no. She looked embarrassed and said she would wait for my daughter. I told her there would be no photos. She left a card that smelled faintly of perfume and paper ink. When the door closed, I felt the quiet press against my chest. Bank. Realtor. Both in one morning. They were not thinking. They were moving. I walked to the office and opened the folder Thomas had left. The pen he placed by my elbow lay there like a small trap. The phone rang again. Andrew. His voice was soft. He asked how I felt after the doctor. I told him I was fine. He said Evelyn had sent him links to 2 residences north of town. He said he had toured one the day before and that it smelled like lemon oil and soup. He said the rooms were bright. Then he paused and admitted there was a refundable deposit on hold for 30 days. He said it could give us options. He said he hoped I would be relieved. I asked him one question. Did you think to ask me before you held a bed for me? He went quiet. I could hear traffic through his window. He said he did not want to stress me. I told him I have a name and a voice. I told him I do not live in a form. He said he was sorry. He said Thomas said it was best to act now. He said Evelyn said this was love in practice. He sounded like a boy again when he added that he did not know what real love looks like for an old father. I asked him to come by that evening. He said he would. He arrived as the light faded. He stood in the doorway with his cap in his hands. He did not sit until I sat. I told him there were papers meant to turn me into a silent man. I told him a banker had called. His eyes widened. He asked if there was a mistake. I told him people do not make this many mistakes by accident. He looked down at his shoes and whispered that he wanted to do right by his brothers. I asked him to do right by me. He told me something then that I did not expect. He said he had not slept well in weeks. He said he kept seeing Nora at the kitchen table. He said he had been afraid since the day she died. He said he thought, if he kept the trains on time, I would not fade. That the plan itself could save me. I told him plans can be kind, but only when they come with listening. He nodded and asked if I would forgive him. I told him, forgiveness can begin before trust, but trust needs proof. After he left, I walked to the shop. The scent of pine steadied me. I sanded a scrap board for 10 minutes without purpose. My hands remembered what my mind had lost. I locked up and headed to Brendan Doyle's office. He met me in a room that smelled like old books and coffee. He listened while I told him about the bank and the realtor and the deposit. He did not interrupt. When I finished, he folded his hands. He said the paperwork he filed had held. He said the trust on the house and the guardrails on the accounts had done what we wanted. He said my children might seek a court order if they believed I could not manage my affairs. He said this could come as a petition for a temporary conservator. He told me not to panic. He told me to gather what I had. I placed the recorder on his desk and pressed play. He sat still and let their voices fill the room. He stopped the recording at one point and asked who used the phrase stage grief as concern. I said Thomas. He sighed through his nose. He said a judge does not like that kind of language. He said the best path now was clarity. Invite them. Set terms. Tell the truth. With proof. He said he would be on call if anything turned. As I walked home, the air tasted like the sea. A gull floated above the harbor, and then veered toward the dark. The house looked too large when I turned the corner. Lights glowed in 2 rooms. The rest lay in shadow. I sat at the table and wrote a short message to each of them. I said I would host a family meeting on Saturday at 6. I said there would be decisions. I said they should come on time. The replies came fast. Evelyn said she would bring a checklist. Thomas said he would bring the updated drafts. Andrew said he would bring the courage he owed me. I placed the recorder on the mantel. I placed the folder in the drawer. I took Nora's scarf from the dresser and smoothed the crease with my palm. I spoke into the empty room. I said I was done being a ghost in my own house. I said the next time we sat together, my children would see me. Not a client. Not a case. Not a bank. Me. A man who has loved and failed and tried again. A father who still remembers the names of his children and the smell of his wife's bread. I let the words settle. Then I turned off the lights and let the dark hold me. I was not afraid. The truth had walked through my door. It would sit at my table. It would not leave without a reckoning. Saturday arrived with rain that struck the windows like a drum. I laid the table with plain plates and glasses of water. No roast. No wine. No warmth to distract. Only chairs facing one another and the weight of what was coming. I placed the recorder on the mantel. In view, but not explained. I sat in my armchair and waited. The doorbell rang at 6 sharp. They arrived together, which almost never happened. Evelyn carried a leather binder. Thomas clutched a folder thick with papers. Andrew held nothing but his hands, twisting his cap. They stepped inside with the cautious politeness of strangers entering a courtroom. "Dad," Evelyn said. Voice smooth. "Professional. We'll get through this as a family. Cian, sit." I told them. My voice surprised even me. Steady, not frail. They obeyed, though unease flashed across their eyes. For a moment I said nothing. The clock ticked. Rain tapped. Then I leaned forward. "I know everything." Cian. They glanced at one another. Thomas cleared his throat. "What do you mean?" I pressed play on the recorder. Their voices spilled into the room. Evelyn. "We need to move fast." Thomas. "Stage grief as concern." Andrew. "Better for everyone." The sound filled the air like smoke. Their faces drained. I stopped the recording. "That," I said quietly, "is who you've become. My children. Talking as though I'm already dead." "I do then." Evelyn snapped her binder shut. "Dad. You don't understand. We were planning responsibly." I slammed my palm on the table. The plates rattled. Responsible? Selling my shop without asking? Reserving a bed in a home before I even agreed? Adding names to my bank accounts? That's management. In second dated a clear date, Thomas stood. Defensive. "We're trying to protect you. When your mind slips further, my mind is clear." I cut him off. clearer than yours, blinded by greed. In second dated a clear date, silence burned between us. Andrew finally whispered, "Dad, we thought this was mercy." In second dated a clear date, mercy? My laugh came sharp, bitter. Mercy is holding a hand through sickness, not drafting contracts in secret. I pulled the folder from the drawer and threw it on the table. Pages, scattered powers of attorney, trust drafts, sale agreements. You wanted me to sign away my life while I could still feel the ink on my fingers. Friended Dade. Evelyn's eyes brimmed with tears. I'm a nurse. I've seen patients lose everything when families waited too long. I didn't want that for you. Friend didn't. You didn't want that for yourself. I replied. You wanted control. To make choices without me. You forgot the simplest thing. I am still here. Thomas's face hardened. You're being unfair. We sacrificed time. Energy. I rose to my feet. Sacrificed? I carried each of you through college. Paid your debts, helped with your homes, your jobs, your broken dreams, and now you stand here telling me I should be grateful while you strip my dignity piece by piece. Andrew's hands shook. He stared at the floor. I used the children, he admitted. I told them you might forget them soon. I thought it would push you to make decisions. My cummed against her. The confession split something inside me. My knees weakened. You weaponized your children's love against me. My voice cracked. Do you know how cruel that is? No one answered. The rain beat harder, as if the sky itself condemned them. I walked to the desk, opened a new envelope, and pulled out my revised will. I set it on the table. 70% of what I own is now pledged to charity. The rest will be held in a fund, released only if you can prove through action. Not words that you see me as a man. Not a bank. 2 years. No shortcuts. King. Thomas's mouth fell open. You can't do this. King. I already have. King. Evelyn whispered. Dad. Please. Her voice trembled. Not from love, but from fear. I shook my head. For 30 days. None of you will enter this house. You will live with the truth of who you've become. If after that, you wish to return, you'll return as children seeking their father, not heirs circling a grave, and then envery two of the clays. Andrew raised his head, tears sliding down his cheeks. And if we don't come back, then I'll know the truth I've dreaded all along. I said, that I lost you long before tonight. And this, the storm outside roared. They left one by one. Heads bowed. Evelyn's tears stained the binder. She clutched. Thomas slammed the door harder than needed. Andrew lingered. Lips parted as if to speak. But no words came. He stepped into the rain and was gone. The house fell silent. For the first time in months, the silence felt honest. Painful, but honest. I stood alone in the living room, trembling, but free. The first morning without them felt like a room after a storm. Nothing moved. The rain had washed the streets clean, and the house held the smell of wet wood. I made coffee and drank it at the kitchen table with no radio on. I wanted to hear what silence really sounds like when no one is pretending to be kind. I kept to simple tasks. I folded laundry. I oiled the hinges on the back door. I wrote 3 checks for the light, the water, the shop rent. I sharpened 2 chisels, even though I did not need them. The rhythm steadied me. The quiet did not hurt the way I expected. It was not an empty quiet. It was an honest quiet. I changed the locks. I left the old keys in a bowl by the door and stared at them until my eyes stung. I was not shutting out my children. I was shutting out the part of me that had begged for scraps of respect. I put the bowl away in a closet and closed the door. At noon, I walked to the harbor. The wind lifted the edges of Nora's scarf, and the gulls called in bright lines overhead. The ocean did what it always does. It moved. It did not care about wills or signatures. I stood with my hands in my pockets and counted boats. A man in a knit cap nodded to me. I nodded back. We said nothing. It was enough. Back home, I found the stray cat waiting on the steps. I set out a small plate with a little milk, then added a slice of turkey. The cat watched with slow suspicion and then ate. I called it Bean because it was small and tough. Bean left when it was done. I laughed once at the empty plate. Not out of joy, but because it felt like the first normal moment in a long time. Letters began to arrive. A glossy brochure for a retirement residence I had not asked to see. A note from the bank that confirmed alerts on my accounts. A card from Julia at the branch. Handwritten, telling me to stop by if I needed a listener. I put the brochure in the trash. I placed the card under a magnet on the fridge. I called Brendan and told him about the realtor and the bank and the deposit. He said the walls were holding. He asked me to keep notes. He reminded me that the next move belonged to me. Not as a tactic, but as a decision about what kind of man I wanted to be when this was over. I told him I wanted to be decent. He said, then act like it. Even if no one else does. The nights were the hardest. Sleep came in short strips. I saw faces at the top of the stairs. I heard Nora laugh in the hall. I touched the scarf on the chair beside the bed and counted breaths until the dark thinned. At 3 a.m, I wrote the same line in my notebook again and again. I will not beg to be valued. On the 4th day, I found a box in the back of the shop that I had not opened since the first winter after Nora died. It held her handwriting on scraps of paper. Little lists. Sand the rail. Call the school. Buy yeast. On one card, she had written 7 words that felt like a hand on my chest. Do the next small good thing you can. I set the card by the register. I decided that would be my work. I made a plan for the house. 3 rooms would be for living. The others would be given away in small pieces. A desk to the community center. A stack of blankets to a shelter on Bridge Street. I carried the first boxes out to the truck with a slow care that made my back ache. Pain. Real pain. Felt cleaner than worry. I called a local counselor and booked a session. I told the woman on the phone I was an old man who had tried to be a good father and had failed in ways he did not understand. She said I was not alone. She said grief makes us forget how to speak plainly. She said she had an opening on Thursday afternoon. I wrote it in the notebook. I showed up on time. I sat in a small room and told a stranger the worst thing I had heard in my own house. You are nothing more than a walking bank account. I did not cry at first. Then I did. The tears came slow and steady, like the tide I had watched for years. She handed me a box of tissues and said nothing careless or false. That silence felt like help. I went to the bank and shook hands with Julia. She looked me in the eyes and asked if I was safe. I told her I was. She set up 2-factor on every account and printed a list of safeguards in clear type. She said the branch would call me for any request that smelled wrong. She said I had more friends than I knew. I walked out lighter by an ounce. On Sunday, I did not set the table. I took a walk to the cemetery and stood by Nora's stone. I told her what I had done. I told her about the recorder and the will and the 30 days. I told her about Bean and the card on the fridge. I told her that the children may hate me for a while, and that I could live with that if it meant we stopped pretending. The wind moved through the trees, and I took that as an answer. The house began to change. I opened curtains in rooms I had kept dim. Sunlight found dust in the air and turned it into something soft. I played a record and let the scratches speak. I cooked simple meals and ate at the counter. I swept the floor and felt pride at the clean lines. Pride is not a sin when it keeps you alive. I wrote 3 letters that I did not send. 1 to Evelyn. telling her I remember the night she fell off her bike and I ran beside her all the way home. 1 to Thomas, telling him I remember the way he kept a broken toaster for a week because he wanted to learn how to fix it. 1 to Andrew, telling him I remember the sound of his laughter on the pond when the skiff sank and he was not afraid. I wrote that I am still their father. I wrote that I am not a problem to manage. I tucked the letters in the back of the drawer where the old keys used to sit. On the 20th day, the sky cleared. I mowed the small patch of grass and trimmed the hedges. Bean watched from the fence and flicked its ear. Mrs. Russo leaned over from her porch and asked if I needed anything. I told her I was fine. She told me fine is what people say when they are not. She brought over soup anyway. I ate the soup and felt something like grace. At night I sat by the window with the lights off and watched the street. Cars passed. A couple argued and then made up with tired smiles. A boy rode by on a scooter and waved even though he did not know me. The world kept its own time. I found it strange and beautiful that none of it depended on my children's approval. Day 26 brought a card in a plain envelope. No return address. Inside was a photo of the shop from years ago, with Nora standing by the door. Paint on her jeans. Sunlight on her hair. On the back, someone had written, "Your work matters." The handwriting was unfamiliar. I pressed the photo to my chest and closed my eyes. On day 29, I walked to the harbor at dusk. The sky went pink and then blue and then the soft gray of evening. I told myself that the 30 days were not a punishment. They were a boundary. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors with locks that ask for respect. I could open them when I chose. That night, I slept without waking. In the morning, I made coffee and stood at the sink. The house was still. The air held the faint scent of lemon from the soap. I realized I was not afraid of the next knock on my door. I would answer it as a man, not a resource. I would ask for honesty. I would give it back. The doorbell rang at noon. The knock was soft. Not the impatient hammer of Thomas or the brisk rap of Evelyn. When I opened the door, Andrew stood on the porch with his cap in his hands. Rainwater dripping from the brim. He looked thinner. His eyes swollen as though sleep had been a stranger for weeks. Behind him, his car idled at the curb with the twins in the back seat, their faces pressed to the glass. "Dad," he said quietly. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He entered like a boy who expected to be scolded. Shoulders bent. Voice careful. He sat on the edge of the sofa, cap twisting in his hands. For a long time, he said nothing. I poured 2 cups of coffee and placed one in front of him. His fingers trembled as he lifted it. "I haven't stopped thinking about that night," he began. "The recorder. Your voice. The look on your face. I thought I was helping. I told myself mercy meant preparing. But it wasn't mercy. It was fear. I was afraid of losing you like we lost Mom. And I thought if I had everything organized, I wouldn't feel the hole inside me." "Head mentor," his words cracked. He covered his eyes with one hand. I sat across from him, waiting. "I was wrong," he whispered. "You needed love, not management. And I didn't give it. I followed them because it felt easier than standing alone. But it ate at me. Every night. It ate at me. I couldn't look my kids in the eye without hearing your voice in that room. Is no lad to make." The twins' laughter echoed faintly from the car outside. I remembered Andrew's laugh at 5 years old, when the skiff sank in the pond. Hopeful. Fearless. That memory pressed against the bitterness in my chest. "I can't speak for Evelyn or Thomas," he said, lifting his eyes. "But I can speak for me. I don't care about the house or the money. I just want you to know I still see you. Not a burden. Not a bank. My father. That mine a day." For a moment I could not breathe. My throat ached as if it were clamped shut. Slowly, I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. His skin was cold, his grip unsteady. "Andrew," I said, my voice low. "You broke me that night. You let their words pass without fighting them. That wound doesn't close easily." His shoulders sank, shame written across his face. Then I tightened my grip. "But you came back. That matters. It matters more than you know." Kane. Tears slid down his cheeks. He nodded, unable to speak. We sat in silence until the coffee cooled. When he finally rose, I walked him to the door. The twins waved wildly from the back seat. Andrew bent his head. "If you'll let me, I'll come again. Not to talk about papers. Not to check boxes. Just to sit with you." "I knew. Come," I said simply. "Bring the children. Let them know their grandfather before the world teaches them to measure people by what they own." Ivan mated. He pressed his lips together, then gave a small, broken smile. "Thank you, Dad." Ivan mated. When the car drove away, the house no longer felt entirely empty. The silence had softened, as though the walls themselves had exhaled. I sat at the table, opened my notebook, and wrote one line. "One has returned. Not for money. For me." That night I slept without waking. In the morning I found Bean waiting on the porch, tail flicking. I set down a plate of milk, and for the first time the cat let me touch its head. Small trust. Fragile, but real. I stroked its fur and whispered, "Even broken things can mend." And no thing. Andrew came back 2 days later with the twins. They rushed into the yard with paper planes and loud shoes. I stood on the porch and let their noise fill the empty places. Andrew carried a bag of groceries and a shy smile. He asked if he could cook. I said the stove still remembers Nora better than I do. He took out eggs and milk and a sack of flour. The boys cracked shells with too much force and laughed when the yolks slipped. I handed them a whisk and showed them how to turn the bowl slow and steady. The kitchen smelled like mornings we used to own. We ate at the counter. Syrup ran down the sides of the plates. The boys told me about a school project on the moon. I told them how their grandmother swore she could see a rabbit in it. They squinted at the window and then nodded as if they could see it too. Andrew watched me speak and did not look away. When the boys went to the yard, he said he had been seeing a counselor. He said she told him that love without listening is a kind of control. He said he wanted to listen. He asked what I needed from him right now. I said I needed him to come back because he wants to, not because he is afraid. He said he would. He put the next Sunday on his phone and showed me the screen like a promise. That evening, I found a note under the door. No name on the envelope. Inside was a single line in Evelyn's small, neat hand. "May I come alone?" No binder. No plan. Only me. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I wrote yes and left the door unlocked for the first time in weeks. She arrived the next afternoon. No laptop. No perfect hair. Rain had shaken loose the careful shell she wore to work. She stood on the porch with her hands in her coat pockets and looked at me as if I were a stranger she owed a debt. I stepped aside and she walked in without speaking. She stood in the living room and took a long breath. I made tea. We sat in the chairs by the window where the old light falls soft. She did not try to lead. She did not try to fix. For a while we listened to the clock. Then she said she had something to return. She placed a small box on the table. Inside lay the gold chain Nora had given her on her 16th birthday. Evelyn had worn it on into her first job, her first election day, her first night in her own apartment. She pushed it toward me with shaking fingers. "I do not deserve this," she said. Her voice was low and plain. "I have been proud. I have been cruel without meaning to be cruel. I have been busy, and I used that like a shield. I forgot that you are a person. I forgot that being a nurse does not make me a daughter. From Mandy. From Mand Indu Siv 1. I lifted the chain and felt the weight of years in my palm. I closed the box and pushed it back. Keep it, I said. Your mother believed you could be both strong and soft. She was right. I want to see you prove it. From Mandy. From Mand Indu Siv 1. Tears filled her eyes. She nodded. She took out a folded paper and then stopped herself and put it away. No forms, she said. No lists. Tell me about the day you met Mom. From Mandy. From Mand Indu Siv 1. So I did. I told her about the broken frame and the beach in Maine. I told her about the boiler that failed and the way we kept warm by laughing at the cold. Evelyn smiled and then cried and then wiped her face with the back of her hand like a child. She asked if I was eating enough. I said yes. She asked what song made Mom dance in the kitchen. I sang a line and she laughed. She asked if I would let her come on Thursdays to cook and to sit. I told her to come early so we could watch the sun leave the street. She stood to go and hesitated. I booked that bed, she said. I called the realtor. I told myself I was protecting you. I was protecting myself from the terror of losing you. I am sorry for the room I tried to push you into. C5. I rose and put my hand on her shoulder. A good apology is a door. Walk through it. Do not drag a binder behind you. C4. She left with a promise to return. The house felt different after she closed the door. Lighter in one corner. Heavier in another. I walked to the mantel and turned the recorder to face the wall. I did not erase anything. I did not need to hear those voices again to trust my memory. 2 days later, a text arrived from Thomas. It held 3 words. Coffee. No paperwork. He came that afternoon in a plain jacket. No tie. Hair out of place, like the wind had told the truth to it. He held a paper bag from the bakery on Derby Street. He waited on the porch until I waved him in. He set the bag on the table and took out 2 cups and 2 pastries. He did not sit until I sat. He did not speak until I lifted my cup. Then he said he had listened to himself in that recording every night since the meeting. He said he had not liked the man he heard. He said he had become a manager the way some men become ghosts. Bit by bit. Through praise and pressure, and small wins that feel like love. He said he had tried to do what was efficient because he was scared that grief would make a mess. He said he had forgotten that love is a mess that belongs to the living. I asked him about the bank. He did not lie. He said he had gone with the papers. He said he had told himself it was smart. He said he had not slept since. He said he would walk with me to the branch and tell Julia he would not try again. He said he would email the realtor and withdraw any request for evaluation. He said he would write to the residents and cancel the deposit. He said he would carry the blame in writing. Not only in words at my table. I told him words are not cheap when they cost pride. I told him paper is better. He nodded. He took out a letter and slid it across the table. It was addressed to me. His eyes stayed on his hands while I read. The letter was simple. It admitted harm. It listed steps he would take. It asked for a chance to know me without a ledger between us. We did not talk about money after that. We talked about Nora and the time he tried to fix the toaster and burned his fingers. We talked about a book he was reading. We talked about the fear that wakes a man at 3 a.m. and tells him he is a boy who has failed. He asked if I would see him on Tuesdays at 3. No agenda. I said yes. He looked younger when he stood to leave, as if the air around him had shed a weight. That week fell into a new pattern. Tuesday coffee with Thomas. Thursday dinner with Evelyn. Sunday pancakes and paper planes with Andrew and the boys. In between, I went to the counselor and said hard things out loud. I fixed a loose stair and patched a place in the roof. I gave the desk to the community center and the blankets to the shelter. Bean began to sleep on the porch mat. Mrs. Russo waved from her steps and told me I looked taller. I said I was only standing up. There were slips. Old habits do not vanish in a week. Evelyn brought a folder one Thursday and then flushed and left it in the car. Thomas started to ask about my bills and caught the word before it was born. Andrew forgot to call, and then drove over without warning and apologized in person. I told them growth hates applause. It wants quiet and time. One night, we all ended up here by chance. Rain drove Evelyn from a broken wiper. Thomas had finished late and did not want to eat alone. Andrew had the boys and a bag of board games. We sat at the old table and ate pasta I threw together with garlic and oil. The twins dealt cards and cheated badly. Evelyn laughed and did not rush to her phone. Thomas washed dishes without being asked. Andrew watched the boys with a look I recognized from the pond. When they left, I stood in the hallway and touched the frame of the door the way I do when I count blessings. There were still wounds. There were still proofs to make. The will would not change soon. The fund would not open itself. But the house had learned a new sound. The sound of feet that came here for me. I wrote in the notebook before bed. Today I saw my children. Not as managers or heirs. As people who can change. I underlined the sentence. I turned out the light and slept for a long time. Spring came slow to Salem that year. The ice on the harbor broke in thin plates that clinked against each other like glass. Crocuses pushed through the dirt by the fence, purple against the gray soil. I woke one morning and felt the house breathe with me instead of against me. The air was lighter. The silence no longer mocked me. It held me. The children kept their promises. Tuesdays with Thomas turned into walks after coffee. He showed me the harbor app on his phone and tracked the ships like a boy with toy boats. He spoke about stress at work and the pressure of numbers that never stay still. He admitted he was tired of living in columns and rows. I listened. And for the first time in years, he looked relieved to be heard. Thursdays with Evelyn became less about dinner and more about presence. She arrived with flowers from the corner market and left her phone in the car. She asked questions about her mother's garden and tried to remember the names of herbs. She cut basil clumsily, laughed, and said, "I'm learning late, Dad, but I'm learning." Her hands smelled like earth again. Sundays with Andrew grew noisy and joyful. The twins ran in circles around the yard, their laughter rising into the branches. Andrew brought his guitar once and played a song he had written in the margins of old notebooks. His voice cracked, but his eyes shone. He said music was the only way he knew how to apologize. I told him it was enough. The walls of the house no longer felt like guards. They were witnesses. Witnesses to repair. Witnesses to a family finding shape again. Still, the wound did not disappear. Trust is not a light switch. Some nights I woke at 3 with their voices from the recorder echoing in my ears. Walking bank account. Stage grief as concern. The words pressed against me like stones in my chest. I would reach for Nora's scarf, press it to my face, and breathe until the weight loosened. One Thursday, Evelyn stayed late. She found the scarf folded on the chair and picked it up. She pressed it to her cheek and whispered, "I miss her too." For the first time since Nora's death, we cried in the same room without turning away from each other. Thomas brought papers one Tuesday. Not legal papers, but a letter he had written by hand. He read it aloud. He promised to respect my boundaries, to never again make a decision without my voice. He promised that if fear rose in him, he would name it instead of hiding it behind management. When he finished, he folded the paper and left it on the table. I placed my hand on it and said, "That is better than any contract you could ever draft." And Andrew surprised me most. He asked if I would come to the twins' school play. I had not stepped into that gym since his own childhood concerts. The smell of varnished floors and popcorn hit me like a wave. When the boys spotted me in the crowd, their faces lit. They shouted, "Grandpa!" louder than the teacher wanted. Parents turned, but I did not care. My chest ached with a kind of joy I had almost forgotten. The play was clumsy. The lines stumbled. The costumes taped together. But when they bowed, they looked at me first. I clapped until my palms burned. Andrew stood beside me, eyes wet, and whispered, "This is what I wanted. Not papers, not plans, just this. It's not raid." At home that night, I opened my notebook and wrote, "Love is not efficient. It is alive." Weeks stretched into months. The house filled with small things, a drawing from the twins on the fridge, a basil plant on the sill from Evelyn, a book Thomas left for me to read. Bean, the stray, now slept on the porch each night as if guarding the door. Mrs. Russo told me I looked different, taller, like grief had shrunk an inch. The will remained as it was, 70% pledged away, 30% locked behind conditions. I did not change it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. It was not punishment. It was reminder. A reminder that respect has to be lived, not assumed. One evening, all three arrived without planning it. Evelyn brought soup. Thomas carried a bag of bread. Andrew had the twins, who dragged a board game across the floor. We ate together in the kitchen, not the dining room. Less formality, more laughter. The soup spilled. The bread burned a little. The boys cheated at the game. We let them. When the night ended, they hugged me at the door. Evelyn whispered, "I love you, Dad." Thomas said, "See you Tuesday." Andrew said, "Thank you for letting me come back." The twins shouted, "Bye, Grandpa." Their voices carried down the street until the car turned the corner. I stood alone again, but the silence no longer felt like a wound. It felt like rest. I sat at the table, opened my notebook, and wrote, "My family is not perfect. Neither am I. But tonight, we are together. That is enough." I closed the book and placed it by the scarf, outside. The harbor lights blinked steady. Inside, my heart did the same. I have learned that love is not a contract. It is a practice. It is the way a person shows up when there is nothing to gain. It is the chair pulled close in the night. It is a hand that does not hurry your answers. It is a voice that stays when the room grows dark. When I changed my will, I thought I was closing a door. For a time, it kept me safe. But safety was never the point. Dignity was. I wanted my children to see a man, not a ledger. I wanted to look in the mirror and see the same. I used to think the worst words I had ever heard were spoken by Evelyn in a hallway. Walking bank account. They still live in me. Yet other words live here now too. Dad, can I come on Thursday? See you Tuesday at 3. Grandpa, watch me jump. The new words do not erase the old. They grow beside them. They ask the old words to soften. I keep Nora's scarf on the chair by the window. Not as a crutch, as a promise. She taught me to do the next small good thing. So I sweep the porch. I answer the phone. I say yes to a walk. I say no when love dresses itself as control. I choose the life that fits the size of my heart. Not the size of my house. Not every wound is healed. Some afternoons sit heavy. There are dreams where the shop is dark and no one comes. There are moments when the old fear whispers that I am only useful if I sign. When that happens, I go to the harbor. I watch the tide carry and return. Leaving is not the end of belonging. It is part of it. My children are learning. I am learning with them. We trade proof instead of promises. We keep small appointments and count them as gifts. We fail and try again. We put the phone down. We cook simple food and eat it while it is warm. We let silence do half the work. If you are listening and you feel yourself fading in your own house, hear me. You do not have to beg to be valued. You can draw a line without closing your heart. You can say, I will see you when you can see me. You can love your family and still choose yourself. These are not opposite actions. One day, the twins will ask what saved us. I will tell them it was not a document, not a clever plan. It was a quiet father who refused to vanish. It was a daughter who left her binder in the car. It was a son who set a letter on the table. It was another son who brought pancakes and a guitar and the courage to be wrong. Tonight the house is still. The porch light glows. Bean sleeps on the mat. On the fridge, a drawing leans under a magnet. The basil on the sill smells like a green morning. The scarf rests where it always rests. I sit with my notebook and write 3 true sentences. I am a father. I am loved for who I am. I am enough. If you find yourself at a table that has grown quiet, do the next small good thing you can. Pick up the phone. Knock on the door. Tell the truth without shame. Leave the binder in the car. Ask for a story. Listen all the way to the end. Then come back next week and do it again. That is how families learn to stay.